safe security is really a new technology or new process that you would methodology.
Yeah.
So I'll let you decide what is pertinent to our group or not,
All right.
and hold it.
So here's where we are.
William Young.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so real quick, I'll just say who I am and.
You do move the presentation.
All right, yeah, I can make a point of standing up back here. That's fine. That works. I can do that. So, all right, where was I at? My name is William Young. I am a what we call a security solutions architect at Cisco Systems. Yeah, it's a fancy word for just some security guy. But while technically I work on the sales side of the house, what I actually do is I do a lot of advising both inside of Cisco's technology units and security and with a number of our enterprise and global customers about designing security solutions for their environment. And I've been involved in security since, professionally in the early 90s, like 92. Prior to that, very unprofessionally, doing more interesting, sometimes far less lucrative things in those days. But the point is, I've been in this space for a long time. And what I like to do at talks like this is rather than come and pitch, like, oh, here's what Cisco's latest security products are and tools and bells and whistles, what I tend to talk about is a little bit around what we have now developed as the safe architecture. Now, a number of you have experience with Cisco infrastructure, Cisco switches and routers and technologies. So how many of you have heard of SAFE before? Seen the old SAFE posters that would say, here's a solution designed for building your secure internet gateway. Or, so we kind of reinvented that. About 4 years ago, when Cisco acquired SourceFire, a number of us realized that Cisco was kind of going all in on security. And by doing that, it was a lot more than just sort of policy and access or what we do normally in a route switch or basics firewalls. It was really bringing a lot of capabilities to the table. And it was no longer adequate to talk to our customers about doing security by features. And I'll go into that in a lot more detail. And we had suddenly a new audience. And so I'm going to play a little video here real quick to kind of introduce what I mean by that. And we'll go from there. Oh, wait, I need to pause because I just realized that's not going to be heard until I turn on the mic. All right, let's try again.
Okay, I'll just get the ball rolling here. I've been hearing about a little bit of tension between the security team and the networking team, and I just wanted to sort of clear the air so we can move forward as a family, or as co-workers at least. So, Dave, why don't you pretend that this puppet here is Rob and act out some of the ways that Rob acts, the things that he does, the mobbing.
Oh, gladly. Hi, I'm Rob. I'm a networking person, so I don't understand anything about security.
Oh, want me to open up all the ports for you, Mr. Hacker?
No problem. There's all that sensitive information you just asked for. Compliance?
What's that?
It's the law around here. I don't care what's in the pipes, as long as they're flowing. You a security person who wants to secure my network? Tell you what, why don't you write up a paper with all of your proposals in it, and I'll schedule us a meeting for the 35th of November. Whoops, time for my coffee break. See you in a few hours.
You know I can't drink coffee. I told you that in private. Wow. Okay, that might be a little harsh there, but you know what? Let's keep going. Rob, why don't you do the same? Let's have you speak to us in his voice.
Yeah.
Using the puppet.
Yes.
Lord, I'm the security expert. Do we even need the internet? All it does is attract a bunch of hackers. I say that we close down all the ports and keep everyone out. Oh, you don't like that plan? Well, I'm just gonna go over your head to your boss and give him a bunch of spooky tales about hackers and malware. Hey, you know what? I said we slow down that network traffic way down. Hey, kids, infrastructure? What are these things? I've never heard these words before. Oh, something broke. I'd love to help you fix it, but my band's got a gig tonight, so I'm gonna go home and tune my bass and shave hashtags into my beard.
Okay, I don't shave hashtags in my beard, and I'm a DJ. I left the flyer on your desk.
What? Why would you brag about being a DJ?
Oh, you guys are the best. No, you are.
That sound or feel in any way familiar inside of your own organizations? Yeah? So, I'm guilty as charged of being that security guy for God knows how many years now, 25, 30 years. But one of the things I talk about a lot, especially with my customers, is trying to get an understanding of what we really need to be doing in security. And we do have this kind of age-old problem, right? We've got networking, who has this mission of making sure we have things up and available and working and delivering faster. And in the IT industry, excuse me, the network industry and the network engineer has done an extraordinarily good job at being able to show the value they bring, right? We deliver more bandwidth, we deliver more services, we deliver more capabilities, better infrastructure, and we see that sort of value curve improve, right? So organizations see the value of spending. Then we got security guys who like to maintain this sort of we're cooler than everyone else thing, right? But it's the top of the conversation. It's part of every boardroom saying, hey, we need to be able to do something about this. We're losing revenue. We're at risk of attack. We're at risk of liability. The fear, uncertainty, and despair conversations that my colleagues in sales over the years have successfully delivered continuously seem to have bled into everyday use. And in a lot of ways, what it really leads down to is this conflict where I've got an organization that's trying to accomplish something. When I used to run a team of sales engineers, I had to constantly remind them that most of their customers weren't security professionals. They weren't paid to be security professionals. They were paid to make better shirts, build better medical equipment, deliver services and something else. Right? Security was not that organization's mission. And we have to understand what that organization's mission was. Because otherwise we just end up with this again. Right? Conflict between two different groups that really aren't on the same page in terms of what our operational objectives are for how to be successful. And lo and behold, we went through the same thing at Cisco. Even just 4 years ago when they acquired SourceFire, which is where I was at for the previous 10 years, we were this deeply nerdy security company. We could get away with saying, this is how you protect stuff, this is how you protect packets on the wire, this is how you stop the bad guys. And then we went suddenly to Cisco and had an entire audience that didn't really know or care about that. Trying to explain to network engineers that an intrusion prevention system is basically like a smart layer 2. In fact, I would try to say, just think of it as a wire with a lot of smarts. Because they want to change the architecture, and they try to build it into things and say, no, guys, you're thinking about too much in terms of what the network is. I looked at the network as a pipe, which was kind of offensive to most of the network engineers who know that there's a lot of intelligence in their infrastructure. So we had to overcome this. And especially considering the balancing act that our customers go through. Right? Security is a big deal, but here's the problem, is that if I've got a set of data to protect, well, what do you guys think? Let me ask this. What do you think the primary mission for the security organization or security group in any organization is?
Protect the integrity of the network and the data.
Okay. Any other suggestions?
Protect the facilities.
Protect facilities? Anything else?
To scare potential wrongdoers.
Scare off potential wrongdoers? I would actually argue, well, all of those are correct, they're absolutely wrong, and why we have a problem.
I would also add to be the point in investigating break-ins.
Yep, absolutely required. Those are necessary. Being able to have good digital forensics, being able to investigate incidents, being able to prepare the organization for the eventuality of attack, understanding what my corporate assets are, and how to deal with the diversity of threats are all important. We talked about confidentiality, integrity, and availability are sort of the classic three pillars inside of security, and I think that's gotten us into a dangerous trap. Because what ends up happening as security professionals is we forget that there's actually a higher purpose. And if we think about it, we might actually be more successful. And that is, the security unit needs to find ways to generate revenue. And I challenge my customers with this sometimes. I'll ask them, how is it that you drive revenue for your organization? Because really it's a cost center, right? And it's one that gets harder and harder to implement because of the diversity of threat, because of the complexity of technology. I mean, heck, you mentioned even at the beginning of the meeting, right? There was new malware that came out that our intelligence organization, Cisco, has talked about. And if you, yes?
How about keeping the company in business?
Well, that's part of it. That's a step in the right direction. The reason I'll challenge my customers even farther is, how do you generate revenue for the company? Is to force them to start thinking of themselves as a service delivery, and potentially as a way to be a product delivery for their company. It's really just almost like a Zen koan, right? It's a way to try to drive a better mindfulness about what we can do for our organizations. Here's an example. Yes?
I was just reading about how frisbees are made, and they pointed out that the largest number of people in the frisbee factory are the people who put them in packages. And I was wondering if what you're talking about a little bit is packaging security in a way that people feel like they're getting something valuable. And so, for example, when you're going, is that kind of where you're going?
Well, that's the start of where I'm going. It's the basics, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about how we get there. And in answer to your question, the example that I think of is one of the things that we do at Cisco is, we've got this IT organization that supports 70,000 employees, 120,000 devices all over the world. Turns out that's a really great data resource. And while we have also a security intelligence organization that draws in terabytes, petabytes of data every day on malware and malicious activity and all this other good stuff, one of the best resources that Cisco has is our own data lake of the things that happen to our own employees. There's phenomenal telemetry there. So we productize that, not out to our customers, but to other parts of the company. So now Talos is more efficient, more effective. We can monetize that. Right? We develop products that kind of grow out of those types of things. So there's innovation that happens there. What we need to think about, though, is how we standardize this. Right? In security, I grew up in the sort of compliance background. It was great. We loved process. Well, we'll put certain rules in place, we'll put certain procedures in place, and they've been going on for decades, right? We've got NIST providing standards, used to be the Rainbow series. Nowadays, there's actually a whole set of standards around incident investigation and secure IT operations. You had things like the payment card industry or HIPAA trying to provide some guidance around privacy, NERC for North American Power. And yet we still get hacked, right? And we still get malware incidents. We still have problems. Because security guys like to think we're this. And we've got this sort of set of tools, and we're just going to come in and make everything safe and good. And I think a lot of folks would like to think so. But in fact, this is really what we're dealing with.
Well, from what I've seen, a lot of it is sadly sloppy IT. And
Well-
sloppy management that doesn't take IT seriously.
Yes and no, it's both. And I'll get to that because I think you're partly right. Here's a good example. Updating software, right? If I've got Microsoft Tuesday, what should I be doing Tuesday afternoon or Wednesday morning?
Reviewing
Drinking.
updates.
I should be patching everything, right?
No, reviewing the updates before you patch.
Well, okay. Review the updates, and then I've got to do that across 20,000 platforms. That's going to take how many weeks to actually realistically roll out? And in some organizations, it can take months, it can take years to realistically maintain an effective IT infrastructure. So even though we security professionals like to say, oh, hey, you patch everything, you're going to remove 85 to 90% of your exposure to threats. And that's accurate, you will. But, come on.
How many other problems are you going to create in the interim because Microsoft rolls out crappy patches?
Well, there's that, or just my own production infrastructure doesn't allow me to be able to do that, right? Because to be able to roll out that type of thing overnight isn't something that operationally can be done effectively. So we need a different strategy, right? Because especially inside security, there's still a lot of innovation going on. There's so much threat happening. There's hundreds of thousands of point products, individual solutions and components. And what ends up happening is our security professionals are overwhelmed and over inundated, and they don't really know what to do either. Right? So they get into that same sort of fragmented aspect. And it turns out, 63% of us actually feel that there's more demand for security to be done right, but the challenge is we don't have enough security professionals, and more customers are asking for, instead of security, they just want secure IT. Right? It's kind of a neat trick. There's a lot more pressure to try to start finding some type of monetary value out of security. How am I getting a benefit from it? And it's challenging when I've got differentiating priorities. Right? Networking, it's simple. IT, it's about providing features and availability. But then I've got development groups who are much more concerned about time to market and product creation and marketing, and not so much about security. Right? And you think about this in terms of like IoT infrastructures, where I love the Mirai botnet scenario. Is anyone here familiar with Mirai and what that was? A few people, 2 or 3. So about 2 years ago, there was this massive outage on the East Coast. DIN DNS and a couple of other DNS providers went offline. So about a third of the United States.
I forgot they were part of a while.
That's right. Well, about a third of the United States went offline for a good part of a day. Mostly because these DNS providers went down. The reason they went down is because these IoT-based cameras all over the world got hacked with what was called the Mirai botnet. They were owned. And
then pretty much destroyed, if I remember.
That's exactly right. They did a distributed denial of service attack against these major service providers that maintain the structure of the internet. Well, here's the challenge I have. If I'm a guy selling these cameras for $50 a seat to a large campus organization who wants an IP-based internet camera security system, am I going to be successful at doing that against the guy who's selling it for $20 a seat or $10 a seat? Right? I'm not, right? But I said, no, I want to keep secure products. I'm going to make them at $50 because that's what it costs me to do my IT development and process, et cetera.
Well, it is possible to do it for the $50 a seat, as long as you explain to the customer, this is why you're going to pay more.
I've never
And you get what you pay for.
I've never met a purchasing department that approves it. And I've been selling, and I sell security, right?
But purchasing's like HR. They say no to everything.
It's not just purchasing though. Let's be specific. It comes down to COGS. If I'm a manufacturer, is it worth, and the reason I say this, is it worth it to me to be able to put out a product that I'm going to have a low rate of return on by having a higher price tag that's covered by my operational costs, or get something out on the street, deliver 10 million units, and then move on to my next product? And that's what ends up happening, right? Those are the things that buys because I can quickly monetize them. And the only reason I bring that up is that's just another strategy that as security professionals we have to deal with. We have to understand that may occur inside of our organizations. From a security product perspective, well, I got tons of solutions I could look at. I can make sure I've got good network segmentation going on. I can have good firewalls, good IPS. I can have dynamic segmentation technologies. I can move things to the cloud. I've got plenty of options. But what ends up happening is that as we add more capabilities, we don't necessarily see effectiveness growing because there's too many tools that are coming into place and there's too much fragmentation. What ends up happening is as I'm adding more capabilities, all I'm doing is introducing more complexity to the organization. And you see this, what was probably one of the best things about a good network infrastructure? You have a single console, maybe two, to manage your entire network infrastructure, right? It's one of the reasons Meraki does well. It's one of the reasons why something like Cisco Prime was so popular. I could sort of manage my entire network infrastructure from one console. Security's never had that advantage. We have dozens of consoles, we've got dozens of tools. Every single thing has either an incident at the desktop, on the network, with my users, with my infrastructure, God only knows. And there's always another tool for the next new problem. So we get this clash of dialogue, and we get this capabilities gap. And this is actually what we need to try to change. We need to try to improve our security capabilities by reducing our complexity. That's a lot of what we're trying to accomplish at Cisco, is doing that sort of change in the equation to make things simpler. One of the ways we do that is to try to build good architectures. Now, if you've heard of SAFE in the past, I should point this more towards me. Okay. If you've heard of SAFE in the past, you may have seen diagrams like this that said, all right, you build this network design, you're going to get a secure network. For what, though? Right? As I look in on this, I kind of drill down and see if I can zoom in. I've got, okay, there's a wireless LAN controller there, and that looks like a switch router, and there's another switching infrastructure, and okay, there's my call manager, there's some routers. Okay, so where's the security stuff, and how's this interacting with how I do my business? It doesn't, right? So we had this sort of almost over network hubris. Build the network this way and you'll be secure. That wasn't accurate. And then a bunch of security guys come in and say, "Oh gosh, you need to bring all this new capability in and lock everything down," and no one's going to build that. So we needed to try to be able to understand two things: where is the security supposed to implement across, and what's the actual flow and outcome of my business trying to accomplish? Now, lo and behold, that's when I bring in a good architecture, right? And I look at an architecture from a security perspective as helping me do a couple of things. One is it needs to be able to help me mitigate risks. It needs me to help mitigate threat and enforce policy across my organization, right? That's pretty straightforward. Hopefully I'm using best-of-breed technologies, but I also need these technologies to work well together. Sometimes that means that they're programmatically designed to integrate. Sometimes it just means that I've got a good process inside of my company, and I need to be able to integrate them. So that means data needs to share. I need to be able to tie them together. Ultimately, I need to tie them to the larger process of my organization. And maybe it looks something like this. I don't know. This is still, to me, kind of a big diagram of a network where there's lots of circles and boxes, and it doesn't tell me about what my outcome is going to be. It's just another wire diagram. Don't worry. We've got plenty of sales reps who will come in and say, "Hey, we got an architecture for you," including my own sales reps at Cisco. Don't necessarily listen to them. What we want to do instead is look at our network architecture, look at our security architecture consistently, no matter how we're doing. And what I do is, rather than talk about, I need this new feature, this new set, this new tool to be able to deliver this type of bandwidth, I want to instead think of the functional capabilities that help me enable a specific outcome. So what's the final delivery that I need to have? Well, we can start doing that. Now, how I do that is, rather than talk about products, and at Cisco, I'm supposed to be able to talk about all of our security products. And I generally can. I'm in that role where I'm supposed to know them all very well, but it's a lot of information. So what I do, and what I've done for years as an architect, is I focus on capabilities. You know, what are the things that we want to achieve inside of our environment? Are the things like having good anomaly detection, or identity management and authorization of identity? Is it being able to have effective user management and controls? How are we dynamically managing policy or virtualizing capabilities across our environment? Do we have good server security? Are we able to handle the traffic that we need with effective load balancing? What type of intrusion detection or intrusion prevention do we have? And can it be effective for the type of traffic that we deliver? So rather than looking at the feature set of them, I look at them as capabilities.
How would you define a feature?
So here's what I end up seeing as a feature is someone says, well, we need an IPS. Okay, great. So we start with an IPS. And then they start saying, well, I need an IPS that can do X, Y, and Z. It maybe needs to do SSL decrypt. It needs to have an open rules language. Or I'm looking at firewalls, and they need to have stateful capabilities for network load balancing. They need to be able to have clustering. So we get into very specific features sometimes in the product. What ends up happening is I go to customers. Okay, here's an example. I had a customer I was talking to 2 years ago, when we had an earlier release on our new version of our next-gen firewall. And they were very concerned that Firepower's threat defense, which was our new firewall platform, to replace the ASA, did not yet have BGP. Right? You guys don't support BGP yet. So I kind of sat down with them and I said, all right, well, hold on. I sat down with them and I said, all right, help me understand how you're deploying your infrastructure. And they show where they use BGP on their border routers between their 3 data centers. I said, so the products you're trying to replace, where are you going to put them? And they put they're drawing the firewalls down below in the infrastructure, and they needed to be able to have clustering and policy consistency across those. So that was all something they went into. And I kind of said, well, where do you intend to implement BGP? Oh, up here at the routers. Then why do you need it in the firewall? Oh, right. So what they were doing was, rather than looking at how they were the outcome they were trying to build towards, they were so focused on, did this box have a blue button versus a green button, that they weren't looking at the larger solution.
It sounds like you're focusing on pieces of hardware rather than capabilities or features that were in the hardware.
Well, and that's what I'm trying to pull people out of, is we still have a tendency to do that. And especially when trying to design networks or develop solutions.
It's everywhere in our industry. I mean,
It
the
is.
whole sales process is about, we're selling you this router and it has the blah blah in it.
Yes, they
And
do.
people aren't, and we have this problem at our level with security all the time, where people say, oh, I went out and I bought the best router, it's got the fanciest firewall, and meanwhile, they don't use real passwords or something like that.
Exactly. Yep. That's exactly right. So this is why I have this talk, is to overcome all of that. So I think we've got the problem landscape down. Okay? So what we have done is a couple of things. First off, we had a bunch of the old school guys who said, oh, well, we'll build some reference architectures. And I kind of shook my head a little bit, but at least it went into it. And I know it's a bit of an eye chart, and it's kind of intended to be. But I'll drill down a little bit more. But Cisco's still Cisco, right? They like to think in terms of, oh, well, we're protecting the branch, or the edge network, the data center. And if you look down, eventually we'll see into some of these boxes that they've built out capabilities. But where the magic started to happen was when myself and a few others said, well, wait a second, what if we just remove all the products altogether? And just focus on what is it we're trying to generate? And not what's the network design like, but what's the network trying to achieve? What are the business operations that happen on it? What are the actual flows? And so we started seeing things like, oh, well, I've got, inside of a small branch, I may have a guest wireless segment. And if I follow that, that's customers getting on the internet. So I need some type of wireless guest functionality. I need to be able to have an access point that gets them through there. And I can follow this sort of subway map on what that flow is doing and where it's eventually going. Does it need to hit payment processing? Does it need to hit the internet? Does it need to hit some other resources? And what are the types of controls that are there? Or maybe I've got a building controls and IoT infrastructure. Well, that's got one particular function that needs to occur. And why not make sure that we're only delivering the services for that, right? So I can start having the thought process of a least privileged model. And our network engineer said, oh, well, if we're going that way, now we can really segment it out. And what we realized was that we were now speaking the same language. By no longer getting the network engineers to just design a network and the security engineers to just ram policy down people's throats, we could get into a same place conversation. And that's what SAFE was trying to do, is to stop looking at the network as a series of components, but as a set of capabilities that align with a specific operational outcome. Whether it was something like an internet edge infrastructure where I have, in this case, like a field engineer wanting to submit work orders. Well, what do they need to do? They're going to need to come into the network, and eventually they're probably going to need to get to the data center where there's some workflow applications that they're interacting with, right? Maybe they need to access some components of the branch or not, but I can start identifying what is those things that they're doing and insert capabilities in the right place. So we built some reference architectures. That's what we kind of see 80-20 rules. But I find that that still doesn't address my customers' needs because I want them to have environments that work for their organization. So I developed, because I'm a security guy, I developed a process, and we put together a process. And it was really a process to have a conversation about designing a network. designing a security organization, designing us to a specific outcome. Now, usually I'm giving this talk to a bunch of security professionals who I'm kind of chastising. So hopefully this will be a way for you to kind of engage a little bit more effectively with the security groups in your organizations too. But oftentimes my security guys, okay, well, where should we start? We're going to start with policy. We're going to start with what our security requirements are. Oh, we need to do an assessment. Let's do a capability maturity model where we snapshot where everything is, try to evaluate the risk is, and start developing a mature growth path. Yeah, okay, that's not going to get me anywhere. That's just 6 months of busy work, and it's a great way for me when I was a consultant to be able to make some extra money on the side. Instead, I like to focus entirely on my organization's desired outcomes. Right, so as a security professional, and this one always drives the engineers I work with kind of crazy, because they come to me with all sorts of issues inside of our products or the specific problems our customers are having. And I said, well, what's the customer really trying to achieve? What's the outcome of the business that business is trying to generate? What's the experience they're trying to have? Don't tell me they need to be able to deliver this much bandwidth. It's what's the outcome of that bandwidth? Because if I know that, we can start designing something different. And generally, when we do this, and when we have these like workshop level experiences where I go in and I have a day-long workshop with customers doing a security architecture, and I ask this question, I have to remind them that security is not the topic. Right? When I'm asking about the business outcome, it's usually not our security outcomes. I don't care about those. I care about finding ways to simplify the conversation. And SAFE lets me do that. What we've done with SAFE is we've taken the old model where we just say, oh, here's some solutions, and instead turned it into a process that allows me to balance the conversation. First off, it's real simple. Identify goals and outcomes, right? What is it that we're trying to achieve as an organization, in either as a whole business and then later as parts of the business?
Before you go on, could
Yeah.
you give an example?
Sure. So I worked with a large medical institution, and their primary purpose was patient health and safety. Okay? The absolutely primary first goal was patient health and safety. That was their mission. So to say, oh, we need to come in and say, well, we've got a data center project that's trying to do X, Y, and Z, didn't really say anything unless we could speak to how it developed and improved patient health and safety. Right? Yes?
Yeah, but even more than that, it's what are the business requirements? What do our employees have to do to get the job done?
That's right. I worked with a major clothing retailer in Canada for a number of years. And when I had a very successful relationship with him, when I moved it on to another engineer, I always had to remind him their primary reason for living is to sell shirts really cheap. Right? In fact, you talk to someone like TJX, who used to be a customer of mine years ago in another life. That is their model. Sell things people like really cheap. And they're really good at product distribution and marketing, and they ended up having to be good at security because we all know what happened to TJX about 12 years ago, right?
Well, that was their own fault.
Yeah, it was, but
you had already left them at that point.
No, actually, I got brought in because of that.
Oh.
I was the guy who sold them a lot of stuff after that, so I got to see that. But
The cleanup.
it was, if they had been smart and had a security group in the beginning that understood that, they wouldn't have had a security group that was pushed aside, which was what had happened before. If they knew that what they had was the opportunity to be able to deliver services better, they might have been able to do that. So I got to know what my organization's big outcome are. But I'm never going to design to the whole thing. I can't boil an ocean, so I start breaking it down into manageable chunks, right? Maybe specific domains or segments of the network. Once I do that,
Through the hospital, what would be those?
well, that could be a couple of things. It would certainly be branch clinics, a hospital organization. It would also probably be things like, well, some of the ones I've worked with are patient service facing technologies. So the workstations on wheels, anything that customers interact with, patient Wi-Fi, public Wi-Fi, because a lot of hospitals are essentially ISPs nowadays. But then there's also medical delivery services and medical delivery technologies, and we're seeing a lot more segmentation on those, which is great. but that also now means those need to maintain availability and uptime. They need to be able to work certain ways. So it breaks down. And then, of course, hospitals have clinics within the hospitals that are kind of their own businesses inside of that. And so they help drive revenue for the hospital, and they need to be able to know what those segmentations are, what the boundaries are around them. Really what I need to do is, as I start to define those segments, I need to define success criteria for them. And that becomes both business and operational. What makes that successful? Because once I do that, I can start looking at what the potential risk to that success is. What are the barriers or impediments to being successful? This is almost more like a business or life coaching seminar in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
I have to read something. I was at the doctor in Beth Israel.
Yep.
And I went to another part of Beth Israel to get a lab test done, and they couldn't communicate with each other.
Because they're in completely different systems.
And I asked them, why you're the same company? And they said, because we don't want them taking our patients.
Yeah, because they're not the same company.
Yeah. But it struck me that the part of the problem with creating good networks is that good networks are actually an obstacle to people who want to prevent people from taking their patients. Like, it's an irony. But good IT actually can interfere with some of the internal goals.
But what you've just identified is two business outcomes, right? Positive patient experience, effective data sharing for relevant patient data, while also maintaining individual ownership and of data sets, right? So you start identifying these are the things that are important to that portion of the business. This business needs to be successful at that. Right? And so when I do that, I can now start building a security solution or even a network solution. Yes?
You know, this is the same thing I used to get asked. What should I buy for a computer?
What do you
My
need to
first
do?
question is, what is it you're trying to achieve? What
That's
do you
right.
want to do? This is a lot less about whiz-bang technology and a lot more about understanding where you are, what you're trying to get to, what you're trying to achieve.
That's exactly right. And so, I used to drive engineers crazy. When I first moved over to a sales side, I was working at Exodus Communications, late 90s. But I'd been doing security architecture and security design for a number of years prior to that. And at Exodus, it was all about moving networking equipment and building designs. And I would get up to the whiteboard and I'd start drawing up a network design, and I'd draw a box and I'd start listing out all these security capabilities. And they'd go, oh, what vendor does that? I said, I don't know. I don't care. This is what the customer needs. They called me the black box guy because it was just some black box. And how we implemented that didn't really matter. It was that we tried to build a solution for security, and in this case, networking at the same time, and doing it in capabilities phase. Once we understood those capabilities, then we could go into the architecture, how those flows are going to fit together, and finally into a low-level design where we start selecting the specific products that will help us achieve that. So here's an example. Right, so a couple of you already jumped ahead, which is great. And I've got, in this case, Acme Corp wanting to be able to identify first their organizational goals. And when I lead these workshops, this is exactly what I do, is try to identify what they are at the big picture. Maybe it's sell lots of shirts cheap, or we've got a major project that we've told that's come from the board to reduce IT infrastructure costs globally. So we've decided that we're going to implement a global data center consolidation campaign. All right, good. So that's probably a 2-year mission. That's going to be kind of big on the company's objectives. We need to find ways to help them drive data center cost improvements, right? Even though it's got technically nothing to do with security, I better be keeping that in mind as a security professional. And even something like a group saying, oh, well, we need to diversify our sales territory. Any of you ever read a book called The Phoenix Project?
Yeah, I need to buy that book. It's a great book.
So it's called The Phoenix Project. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. It's the only IT operations book I've ever read that had me on the edge of my seat. I started it on a Friday afternoon, and I was up all night, finished it 4 hours later. I just would not put it down.
It's written in the vein of a mystery novel.
It is. It's a piece of fiction around a company where this guy gets pulled in as the new IT director, and there's just Sev 1 after Sev 1 after Sev 1, and it's a nightmare. And it's really a book about DevOps. But
I need to go read that.
it is. It's a great read. But there's a
It's a great
security
book.
guy in it that gets into it too. And there's this one story that I thought was wonderful, which was they had the phone systems go down. And it may have been something about security. It may have been about IT operations. But unfortunately, it happened at the last day of the quarter. So now all this business got pushed out another quarter. They didn't close probably $5 million worth of revenue because the phones didn't work. Right? And when the sales manager found out that the only reason it hadn't been done is because IT wasn't willing to spend $1 million and get that budget released, he said, hell, I spend that much in entertainment expenses every year. I'd have given that to you for nothing. Right? So that's part of trying to understand what are those outcomes that we can have impact on and need to have relationship to. If security knows what those success criteria are, we can be part of that solution. You know, oftentimes I talk to my customers about, well, you know, if you're well positioned, you've got visibility into every nook and cranny of the network in the organization. Oftentimes as security professionals, we have more visibility than the networking team. But when there's a problem in the network, do you ever pick up the phone and say, hey, you know, I've noticed a problem in the network? When I've convinced my security customers to do that, magically they get budget and they get really excited. I used to close a lot of business that way, was I solved IT problems with security rather than security problems. So we understand the larger business organization, but now to boil it down, I need to put together my places in the network. And at Cisco, we like to do things like, oh, well, we're going to focus on the secure campus or the data center. But when I do these workshops, it's really whatever your organization is, how you see it. Because we want to sort of break it up. Is it maybe a payment card segment? Is it a branch facility? Am I looking at my wide area network? Well, you'll see my wide area network is branch, edge, campus, data center, but maybe when I go into the branch, I've got payment card, I've got guest services, I've got Internet of Things, I've got staff networks. And even maybe within a branch, I might have specific smaller subclinics if I'm a hospital or manufacturing, wherever they are, it doesn't matter. They're just labels. I can have my pink bunny rabbit segment. But now I've got to do the same success criteria for each one of those. I start to articulate what it is that's going to be important about getting good functionality and good security. So here I started saying, oh, well, maybe for this particular segment, I'm looking at hardening defenses on the internet or providing good dynamic segmentation, but I also need to realize that I want customers to have a good bandwidth experience in my stores, right? Because they're going to be price comparing, they're going to be looking at how-to videos, whatever. They need to have a positive experience. So I want to get those things in there and identify what the potential risks are. Now here I'm doing it organizationally across the entire organization and identifying pins and where they may be sitting. But I can also do that in smaller segments.
Okay, William, what's a pin?
Place in the network.
Okay.
Thanks for reminding.
I was
So
like, what?
the first thing was trying to get a whole set of what are the segments that are going on, right? What are the parts of my network? What are the larger outcomes that I'm trying to occur? But now I can start going into a capability phase where I've started collecting the data that I want. When I do that, I usually take the capability phase down from a place in the network to specific flows. I start to identify what are if this is my internet perimeter or my data center, what are the things that are going to happen as specific actions within the network? Often that's most easily done by the user groups and network services that are being delivered. Right? It's just a way to break it down. But all right, here's my web browser. And that's going to go through a series of components out to the internet. At a very simple level, yeah, it's going to hit a router, it's going to hit a switch, it's going to hit another router, it's going to go out the door. All right, terrific. How do I do that? What's going to be successful there? So I go through and clarify the success criteria. And as I do that, I try to identify risk, also what the compensating capability is. So now I start to think, all right, I've got users who are going to be accessing the internet. What are the things that are going to impact their operations? If I'm in a call center, well, users that have taken access to the internet, the probability of malware infection goes up. That could impact their ability to access customer data systems. Or we could lose phone connectivity. We could start numbering off the things that would not allow that call center to be effective. Maybe that's just loss of the telephones, but maybe it's access to customer data. Maybe it's the likelihood of being compromised. It's call center users ineffectively or inaccurately or worse than mishandling customer data. Either way, I start to identify what those risks are. And it could be an external threat like ransomware, malware, or it could be an internal threat based off of just user awareness. And then I start putting in appropriate capabilities. Well, I need a good firewall, or I need the ability to see threats on the network. But we encrypt all our traffic. Okay, well then I need either decryption technology or a way to see that threat on the endpoint. And I start to piece it together, and I start putting the pieces into the flow. So now when I've got a wireless manager or a clerk who's physically connected to the network, I started implementing and drawing in the security capabilities that I want for their specific flow. So, okay, they've got host-based security, they get onto the wireless network, they may want some type of wireless intrusion prevention and posture assessment to know what kind of device it is since it's wireless. Is it their own iPhone or is it a corporate asset? I need to posture and determine that. Maybe I want to do flow analytics, but I start putting the pieces together, and when I do, that's when products start to kind of magically show up. Right? Oh, look, I can actually consolidate all of these into an next-gen firewall. I even had one customer, not long after our acquisition, when we just started integrating ASA and Firepower together, they were very frustrated that they had bought a bunch of Firepower equipment from SourceFire, and now ASA was coming along, integrating Firepower services. I said, well, it's not a problem. It's all managed the same way. This is one of it's part of the box here and part of the capabilities here, and I drew the dotted lines around them, and I said, same console. Oh, really? Really?
Yeah. Do you often find yourself disagreeing with clients about what the threats are and how important they are?
Good question. Because once we do that, the next thing we do is we start to identify what the gaps are, what do they have and not have in your organization, and when it's done, we actually try to hack it. Because when I was doing security architecture work and security assessments with customers, and I would actually get paid to do pen tests in my early days, the people who hacked the network the best were the people who worked on it. They knew where all the weaknesses were. And so let's do that. Let's design that in, knowing what the larger outcomes are. And it's not just thinking like it's an auditor, it's thinking like an attacker. It's thinking like someone who wants to burn the company down. It's a great way to get all your rage out.
Does that work compared to wondering about attacks because a lot of attacks in the world are random. They're not a single person trying to come after you. They're caused by the noxious stuff in the environment.
Well, they're both, and it's okay to bring that fear and uncertainty in. It's part of why we try to have these conversations, usually not with 2 or 3 people. When the healthcare I mentioned that I worked with, we did a safe workshop over 2 days. We had 40 people in the room from each of the major operational groups inside the company. Right, so, yes. But what also ended up happening is we'd hear that, oh, we need capabilities like X, and 2 other groups said, yeah, we've been building that already. Really? Right, so we're trying to get some cross-communication between the groups, and just having a framework for doing that.
What a concept.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that most people are taking your advice about what's dangerous, or do a lot of them bring a lot of their own sense of what's dangerous to you?
Both. For me, I find it's about 50-50. And it also depends on the maturity of the customer. If I've got customers who have very mature security organizations, and by mature I mean ones that are not just good at policy or just good at auditing, but maybe also have a forensics unit and also have a threat preparedness unit. So like they've got sort of the whole spectrum of security functionality. They've got a CISO who understands the operational outcomes of security inside their organization. They're the ones that are bringing good information and oftentimes new perspectives. So that's when I bring in my guys from our threat intelligence group and say, okay, here's the latest we're seeing in threats. And they want that. They want current threat intelligence. They want that kind of information because they know it's not something that they can manage. So they're now looking for good external resources to help populate their thinking. Less mature ones, they're building their threats off of what they see on CNN and what they get in the daily news rags, right?
And is that radically different than what the intelligence group says?
Yes. Even though I can open up the Register every single day and I'm seeing a new threat. Right? Anyone ever read the Register? It's an online newspaper out of the UK.
Oh, it's
Follows
freaking awesome.
yeah, it's a tech industry newspaper and blog out of the UK. Covers a lot of this. Likes to call Cisco the Borg.
The what?
The Borg.
Oh, God.
What's the name?
I've never
The
seen that.
Register?
The Register.
Oh.
And you recommend that?
I do because it's a lot of good news on IT. Sometimes it's a little snarky because it comes with British humor, but
Does
they
it cost or is
also.
it free?
What's that?
Does it cost or is it free?
I don't know. It's free. It's just in my RSS newsfeed, so I read it every day.
So people who are watching CNN and getting their news from mainstream sources, are they getting a really distorted view of what they should be doing?
Yes.
What's the big distortions that you see?
Well, I think the big part of it is they're not really being given any answers. All they're being given is the problems. They say, well, users, you need to protect your privacy data. Actually, I heard it earlier. It's about like fingerprint data and biometric data. There's a lot of scare about like the loss of biometric data. Most of us don't realize that that's kind of secured. It's a unique hash. A hash of a fingerprint can't be used to turn back into a fingerprint. It's only available in a replay attack, and if I then somehow can recreate the PKI infrastructure that most of those services are delivered on, which is actually kind of hard to recreate someone else's PKI infrastructure, or their private key infrastructure.
Unless you were in their network and you just copied them.
Well, yes, but even then, I've got to get into a race condition for a two-factor authentication or a key exchange. And so, it's actually a lot harder to deal with than not, right? It's the gummy bear attack works, but not the like the data itself, because there's already so much mathematically built into the process. But it's really bad when we lose a fingerprint. It's not. It's easier for me to use a gummy bear to steal your laptop. So we don't get that kind of thinking in place. So there's a lot of fear, and the solutions don't get directed the right way. But by focusing on what the outcome is, I get to start looking at what the real capabilities are and what the real risks are to my organization. And I get to hack it, right? Try to understand, will it pass? But once that's done, now I can start putting the capabilities into the architecture that I may originally have just said, oh, well, I'm building a network. That means I need a switch, a router, firewall, switch, and a router, and I'm all set. That's my basic network, right? Come on, it's my basic network. I build global networks. That's all you need. Sure, maybe it's spread around. But I start putting the specific capabilities where they need to be to give me the best effectiveness. Once I've done that, I also have this other little thing that showed up earlier, and I don't know if you noticed it because I forgot to point it out. So I'm going to go back a couple of slides and show it to you real quick. We'll find the mouse. Here we go. Back here on that first slide on business or outcome and organizational goals. You notice I've had this column over here on priority. Right? Because generally when I come together and build out one of these big architectures, and we've gone through and started designing a solution that specifically meets my operational needs, customers go, wow, that's a lot. Right? To accomplish, to accomplish all of these extended capabilities, and to build a network that's going to have all those functions filled in, is going to require all these different products, and that's going to cost me a lot of money. But because I know what my organizational outcomes are, and the priorities around those, I can start determining and weighting which things are more important than not, right? Is the loss of customer data going to significantly affect my business? Well, history tells us in 90% of the cases it doesn't. Right? You get some bad press for a few months, and you move on. Right? I think Facebook is actually getting it worse than anyone else, and that's mainly because people don't understand how the data is managed. Right? But
Cambridge Analytica.
Facebook stock is higher.
Cambridge Analytica.
Facebook has come all the way back, and its stock is higher
That's right.
than it's ever been.
And the reason Cambridge Analytica lost out was because they showed they were stealing the data, not that they lost the data. So, whole different role that they
Well,
play.
isn't that everything that we're concerned about? Like everybody's worried about.
Yes, but they stole the data from Facebook. Facebook got better. They look better to everybody else. They improved in the market. Cambridge Analytica, who is the bad guy, is the one that went bankrupt. And so, my point being is, I can actually start looking at what are the risks to my organization, and I can start prioritizing the security capabilities that I need to deliver against the business outcome. And when I'm working with a sales team, and I do this, part of the reason I do this is not only to be able to help my customer build a sort of a 3-year to 5-year plan on how they're going to take their security implementations across their organization, but it's also to give our sales team, here's your sales roadmap for the next 5 years. Right, here's where you need to go. But it also helps the customer understand that, you know what, not everything is going to come from Cisco. There's going to be capabilities that you've identified that you need that we don't offer. And that's okay, right? Because at least now we know what we can, there we go, what we can deliver as functions and not functions, right? And so we start being able to put together a solution that meets their specific needs. They know what other vendors to bring in. They know the requirements that they can look at. And oftentimes, the smart ones take it beyond just the product and the technology. They start looking at how we implement our business practice. How do we implement our investigational process? What are the processes that we use for introducing change in our IT infrastructure? How do we manage things? So that they start looking at their human interface processes as well. And now we're starting to see a lot more in terms of operationalizing environments. We're seeing a lot more programmatic activity showing up because those questions are being asked. Well, we want to make sure that they're being introduced into the conversation as well. Once I've done that, though, then my guys can actually get down into the specific hardware choices, right? We'll actually build the wire diagram that never tells us what's actually being delivered from a security capability perspective. So when I'm working with customers, I usually never get past this phase, and I hand it back off to the engineers and say, there, go build your customer's network. Right? They know the outcome I'm trying to get. Now.
So I have a final question because we're on this thing.
Yep.
Can you transfer the logic behind all that to the cloud and apply everything you demonstrated to the cloud, and you see...
I can apply it any way that I want, yes.
And do you foresee that Cisco might have to do that?
We are doing that. We're already working on that. And a number of our sample designs considered various cloud solutions. And we have cloud products too. You know, we've got a DLP product called CloudLock. We've got security in the cloud. We've got security from the cloud. And because we are also a cloud provider, we need to look at how we help secure the data center that the cloud's built around. You know, so there's a lot that happens there.
A lot of people forget that there is, in fact, a data center built around a cloud. They think it's like their data's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, the challenge is it's distributed, right? And it often gets replicated in multiple ways, so it's not just in one place. You know, your information at Google isn't in one place, it's usually in about 12 at any given moment. And that's fine, it's what allows service delivery. But it means I can, just like you're asking, I can apply it to any particular use case, right? And in this case, it's me using the attack kill chain, which is a model for how we describe a threat scenario. But it can also be a business management process for how I'm implementing IT and technology. It can be a cloud delivery service. But if I'm going to say, oh, well, how do we secure the cloud? I'd first be asking, what are you trying to gain from the cloud service? What is it you're trying to get out of it? Why are you wanting to move there? And then what are the things that are going to allow it to be successful for you? What are the things that are going to be getting in the way of its success? Right? Well, a misconfiguration at Amazon Web Services would be really, really bad. Yeah, but is it Amazon's problem or is it us? Who's the one that owns that configuration component?
Well,
once we know that, then it's a more clarified. That's right. So being able to ask those allows you to create that type of segmentation in your own thinking. Now, what we've done is we've articulated a lot of these as specific solutions that we call that we still call safe. You can go to cisco.com/go/safe and see the reference architectures that we put together. I don't usually live by these. I live instead by the conversation. That outcome that I'm trying to get to. And when I have those conversations with security teams, networking teams, desktop and endpoint operations, in conjunction with the overseeing management, Then we actually start designing real solutions for customers. And customers can actually start doing it themselves. So oftentimes when I do something like a safe workshop, we'll just take one piece of the group segment, and I say, okay, great, we're done, you now know how to do this, and I walk away. Because I'm in sales, so I don't actually get paid for doing any of it. It's,
Well,
we do, yeah, we just do these work.
At least you're an honest salesman and you actually care about your customers and you don't want them to just pay up for shiz they don't need.
I'm in an envious role. I'm in a security architecture role where I
You're
can say
an
what I
engineer.
want. Yeah.
You're not a salesperson, you're an engineer.
Yeah, I just get paid on commission, but that's the point. I get to be consultant. And the idea, though, is that this is a way to start. I mean, it's a way to start thinking about how you want to deliver functionality inside your environment. And if you're having to deal with your security teams, this is a way to help you start getting on the same conversation. Or if you're the security person needing to work with your networking teams, again, the same thing. Yeah.
Can you make your slide presentation available tomorrow?
Yes.
Okay, give it to me, I'll post it.
Yeah, I've already interacted with Steve, so I'll make sure I get it forwarded up
Thank
to
you.
him.
I saw online that
means-
there's a specific certification or set of certification for SAFE. Can you talk about that?
There is not. So there's a couple of things that we have in terms of reference architectures that Cisco now has some services around. So for example, there's Axion is selling cyber insurance for customers. And they do so based off of a couple of specific security architectures that have been developed in coordination with Cisco and Apple. And so customers that have all of those pieces together around ransomware defense and endpoint security and device security can usually get a significant discount on cybersecurity insurance. We have a variety of reference architectures that are available, but there isn't so much a certification, other than what we try to teach our architects and our partners.
How about the workshops you were talking about?
They're delivered by our security solutions architects. And we teach some of our partners how to do that.
And how does one access that?
You engage your Cisco sales rep and say, hey, we'd really like to try to design the next phase of our security organization. I've heard about this thing called SAFE. Can you get an architect to meet with us? That's about all it takes. Okay? And I know you guys have other business you want to talk to, so I'll let you do that. And I appreciate you.